Of just about 45 seconds.
All right, and I'm going to go live.
All right, let me feed you some audio. Here we go.
The following program is being brought to you on the Voice America Empowerment Channel. For more information about our network and to check out additional show hosts and topics of interest, please visit voiceamericaempowerment.com. The Voice America Talk Radio Network is the worldwide leader in live internet talk radio. Visit voiceamerica.com. The views and ideas expressed on the following program are strictly those of the host or guests and do not necessarily reflect the views and ideas held by the Voice America Talk Radio Network, its staff, and management.
Here we go.
Welcome to Getting Common with Professor Carlos Chapman. Getting Common covers a variety of topics and features guests from business, law, politics, government, education, and some of the most insightful entrepreneurs. It's a refreshing, common sense approach to some of the most important discussion points today. Now, here is your host, Carlos Chapman.
Hello, everyone. I'm Carlos Chapman, and I am your host of Getting Common. In my day job, I'm an associate professor of law at Washington and Lee University in Lexington, Virginia, where I teach a variety of business courses, ethical courses, and some transactional skills stuff. I am very excited today because we are going to talk about the Free the Hair movement and grooming codes. And I have assembled a panel of sister friends, as I will call them all, to celebrate Wendy Greene, who is, I consider, one of the architects of the grooming code legislation. Through her groundbreaking scholarship over the years, she's been toiling at this for 10 plus years, writing amazing law review articles. So I am very, very excited to talk about grooming codes, how hair discrimination impacts our lives, and generally to celebrate Wendy. So before we get started, I'm just going to let my guests introduce themselves, starting with Wendy Greene.
All righty. Well, good morning. And thanks so much, Carlos, for having me. And congratulations.
Thank you.
On your Common Sense podcast. I'm so excited to be here. And I just love the opening, just to hear your name. It just brings a joy to my heart. So I am Wendy Greene. I'm a professor of law at Drexel University, Thomas R. Klein School of Law in Philadelphia. I'm also the founder of the hashtag Free the Hair movement. And as mentioned, one of the legal architects laying a legal blueprint for what is commonly known as the Crown Acts and like legislation that combats race-based natural hair discrimination that African descendants experience in workplaces, schools, and other spaces.
All right, Rasheedah.
Hello, I'm so excited to be here. And congratulations again, Carlos. And I'm always down to celebrate my dear old friend, Wendy Greene, fellow South Carolina Belle. But I'm Rasheedah Thomas. I am a DC-based communications strategist. I'm the principal and co-founder of RC Communications, a firm based here in Washington, DC. I tell people that I'm the woman that you hire if you're either in a crisis or you're ready to nail down your messaging and brand yourself as an expert in your field.
Awesome. We all need more Rasheedah. Like, I need to write down what you just said so that I can know that we need to just bring you to Ludi or call you or something, because I think we could all
call me time.
We will call you all the time, unfortunately. Marissa, last but not least.
Yeah, good morning. I'm literally the last. Like, I'm like the sort of the newbie to this friend group, and I'm just super grateful for Wendy introducing me to Carlos and Carlos introducing me to Rasheedah. And I am an assistant professor of law at St. John's University in New York. And I am also a human rights practitioner, and I moonlight as a human rights consultant from time to time. And I'm just really happy to be here and glad to really call you my friends. And Carlos, congratulations, like on this show, but also on being like a newly tenured professor.
Thank you.
Yay.
Oh, thank you. Yes, with the asterisk of pending, trustee / provost approval. Yes, I am a lawyer and I have to give the disclaimers, right? I have to put the asterisk up and give the disclaimers. So I should say we have kind of broken protocol a little bit in that Wendy and I both have champagne on set today. So at some point we're going to be drinking champagne during the show. So just don't be surprised when you hear a bottle pop. That is what is happening. All right, so here's what I want to start with. And I'm going to start this one with Wendy, because my first question is, why do we even need the Crown Act and other legislation? I have people say, what's the big deal? If you want to go to work, you need to look the way you're supposed to look to have a job. You should dress the part. Or I have people say, don't I have a First Amendment right to wear my hair however I want to? And clearly both of those things are wrong. And so I need Wendy, our resident constitutional law professor, to explain why we need that, and explain why it is important.
Sure. So what many people are not aware of, a lot of people are just not aware of race-based natural hair discrimination. And what that means is it's discrimination on the basis of our natural hairstyles and hair textures like afros, braids, twists, locks, bantu knots, and so forth. And so for many people, they really think that we are able to rock our hair freely and freely rock our hair as we so choose. But what has happened under our federal civil rights protections, like the Civil Rights Act of 1964, we've had federal courts that have actually declared that race-based natural hair discrimination, except for in the cases of afros, does not violate our federal civil rights protections against race discrimination in workplaces and other spaces. And so what this legislation really does, it helps to basically what happens under federal law is that if you lock, braid, or twist your afro and discriminated against on those grounds, you don't have any legal recourse, only in the cases involving discrimination on the basis of afros. And so what this legislation and other types of legal reforms really does do is what I call like curing a hair splitting legal distinction. It really cures this gap in civil rights protections by making very, very clear in the legislation that race-based natural hair discrimination is racial discrimination, and that it is impermissible in our workplaces, in schools, in the case of New York, for example, also in public accommodations and housing. And so this is why we need the legislation, is really to try to combat, centuries of racial discrimination on the basis of our natural hair texture and hairstyles, similarly to like discrimination on the basis of our skin color.
How do they define afros? Or do they?
Well, they don't really define an afro other than it is an immutable characteristic of Blackness. So the idea is that only Black people have afros, and if you have an afro, you must be Black or African descendant. Now, we know that's not true, right?
Right.
Because a lot of folks, claim to be Black or African descendant who are rocking fros, right? But how courts and many people have thought about is that afros are something that are uniquely a unique signifier of Blackness, right? Or an afro hair texture is a unique signifier of Blackness. So therefore, the idea is that if you discriminate on the basis of an afro, they totally understand why that's racial discrimination. But magically and curiously, if you lock, braid, or twist that afro, then it's no longer race discrimination, and it doesn't violate our federal civil rights laws. At least that's how it's historically been viewed for like the past 40 years. But I'm happy to report that in light of some new case law, constitutional case law, in fact, and I'm serving as a legal expert for this case involving DeAndre Arnold and his cousin Kaden Bradford in Texas, that the NAACP Legal Defense Fund has brought on their behalf because they have been discriminated against on the basis that their locks. They were unable, meaning Kaden Bradford was unable to matriculate in his educational program unless he cut off his locks. DeAndre Arnold was told that he couldn't walk during graduation unless he cut off his locks. And they brought a really groundbreaking constitutional law case challenging this grooming policy in the schools. And to my knowledge, the federal district court has now enjoined the enforcement of that grooming policy for the first time, I think, in constitutional history, and has actually declared that this grooming policy that barred long hair adorned by male students is a violation of the 14th Amendment, its prohibitions against sex discrimination, as well as its prohibitions against race discrimination. And to the point about First Amendment, it is an infringement upon their cultural expression in violation of the First Amendment. So wow. I'm really happy to share, this really groundbreaking news about this particular constitutional law case for the first time that is actually protecting students against this negative enforcement of grooming policies, regulating their hair, and viewing it as sex discrimination, race discrimination, and infringement upon their constitutional rights to be free to express their their cultural identities.
Awesome. Very exciting and rare for us to have like something to celebrate from a court, right?
This is true.
Yeah, it doesn't happen often.
Very
All right.
often. Right.
So Marissa and Rasheedah, what I'd like to do is to have a conversation about how these grooming codes and even just, unspoken cultural norms have impacted your lives and, why we need to end it. How does it change the way people engage with the workplace? So I'll start with Rasheedah. You now own a business, but before that, you obviously had to work somewhere. And in your experience of working somewhere else, how did these grooming codes that Wendy's fighting to get rid of impact you?
So self-employment is a blessing. And it is. But to start, I went to Howard University, the Howard University in Washington, D.C., where a Black woman expressing herself through her hair was celebrated. I learned so much about what we could do with our hair while I was in college. I mean, you walk on Howard's campus, honestly, any HBCU campus, to be frank, and you will see every style from straight to bald and everything in between. It was different when I went into the world where it was not, the Mecca, not just Black people that I was surrounded by. When Obama became president in 2008, I decided never to get a relaxer again. There was something about there being a Black president. I said, my president is Black. This is a new day. I'm going to stop straightening my hair. I'm going to embrace my natural curls. So over the next 2 years, I transitioned, and that was pretty difficult in the workplace where I was in the vast minority. I had to answer a lot of really awkward questions, really duck people trying to touch my hair. I had one really very awkward interaction with a colleague in the hallway where there were other people around where he was debating me. He kept insisting that I had cut my hair. And I was trying to educate him on shrinkage. Like literally my hair is just curly today. And what made it even more horrible is this person worked in HR. So, Wendy's work is so incredibly important because Black women should be able to go to school, work, and everything in between and wear their hair however they want without being discriminated against.
I don't understand the need to touch people.
I don't know.
And their hair. And I often
it's
say
a violation.
Well, and what I say is that like you're petting me like a pet, you're petting me like I'm not a human being, right? You're treating me like I am a non-human. And the same way you would walk up to a dog and pet it, you're walking up to me and petting me. So please don't touch me or my hair without permission, but that doesn't stop people. I find I'm always like ducking the hands, like, yep. Please don't touch me with your COVID hands and put them all in my hair that is near my face.
Exactly.
Like, don't do that. So that's your PSA, everyone. Like, please don't touch and pet Black people. Like, we don't like it. Nobody likes it. All right. Now, Marissa, you have this unique position in that you're currently a professor, but you did not mention that you used to be a very important government official in New York City. And you helped to pass a version of the Crown Act in New York. So I would love for you to talk about why you felt that was important, how you found Wendy in the first place, and just kind of, why it's necessary for cities to do this in addition to, the federal court cases and other things too.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, so I'll say that my meeting Wendy was like serendipitous because people knew about the work that was happening in New York City and someone connected us on Facebook, right? And the rest, I think that's how it happened, Wendy. And I think the rest was history, right? At that point, I realized I was like, I don't think we've actually been citing Wendy's work. And Wendy needs to we need to bring Wendy in to the New York City government apparatus to educate, lead us. And also we on our end need to be giving her credit for laying the groundwork for what we're actually trying to do. As far as the importance of local governance is what affects people's daily lives. Like when you actually are looking for an apartment, when you're enrolling your children in school, when you are reporting to work, you're doing most of that locally, right? And so the local ordinances and policies that are in place are what put money in your pocket, keep money in your pocket, what make the difference if you're a Black woman of you being part of the public sphere or being relegated to the private sphere. And so the grooming codes in New York, as they existed prior to New York City's enforcement guidance around hair discrimination, were such that people were getting suspended from school, right? And of course, when you're suspended from school, not only does it have a deleterious effect on your education and your reputation as a student for being troublesome, which then can lead to disciplinary and even criminal proceedings, but it disrupts your entire family. Your parents have to come and pick you up, right? And then they're in trouble at work. And so not only is discrimination just like ridiculous on its face, but it has actual material outcomes for people. And so it was really necessary for New York at the time when we were trying to push through a host of progressive policies to actually tackle that as well. And we found that it wasn't just Black women who were benefiting, but anyone who was perceived to be Black or perceived to be sort of affiliated with Black culture in some way. So you had Puerto Rican kids getting tossed out of school, Dominican kids, like whether they were like Afro descendant or not, and so on and so forth. And there are people of all genders and gender expressions as well. And so when you were actually protecting people from that one form of discrimination, there was this like intersecting impacts that are had on their lives, and you're sort of liberating them on a number of fronts. And I think it was just really meaningful that we did that. I will say one more thing before I shut up is that on the policy end, it's super important, but it's also important because it has an impact socially, right? Has an impact socially for like even the conversations you're putting up with your traditional parents or grandparents in your home, right? Because once people start educating themselves around the fact that this is, a legacy of discrimination and internalized racism, even with our families, then people start to challenge their own beliefs about what your hair should look like and how you should present yourself. So it just has positive impacts throughout society at the local level.
So Marissa's going to have to leave early, so I'm going to go ahead and ask Marissa a follow-up question. And you currently have your hair in a twist out. When you worked at the city, you had locks. How did you personally, were you personally impacted by hair care discrimination, just through your career and in being brave enough to go ahead and wear your natural hair, even when you were in those environments before?
Yeah, absolutely. If you Google my name along with hair discrimination, you'll see this New York Times piece that comes up that talks about like my experiences when I was practicing law on Wall Street, when people were asking me, right, can I wash my hair with locks? With other Black employees, other Black colleagues telling me that I wasn't a good fit for the firm and I was making them look bad, right? Because I was transitioning to natural hair. And so I grew up wearing my hair natural, but also in a context of not having a lot of freedom of what I could do because of the cultural, religious, like national origin context in which I was living. And so it was very important for me to be free and to like express myself, and then to sort of go through all of the schooling and getting all the accolades and being a good student and getting the job, then to hear from even my own fellow Black colleagues that you're still not enough, right? We need you to shrink yourself just a little more, was very painful for me. And so I think it played a part in driving me out of that sector. And I'm really hoping that now that I'm in academia, or now that I've been in government, that my presence in those sectors as someone who wears their hair in a multitude of colors and textures, that I will give people the confidence to also do the same, and that I will be challenging those people who have the mindsets of, there's a certain way to be professional. Absolutely.
Absolutely. It reminds me of what Rasheedah said about, having to have an argument with somebody about, did you cut your hair, and explaining shrinkage. The other thing you have to explain is like, if you get braids, your hair grew. Like, no. Like, or if you wear a wig, and it's the issue of, why is my hair always the subject of conversation? Right. Such that if like, I'm paranoid about changing my hair, and I would think about this when I was in practice. I was like, if I'm going to switch my hair, it can't be too different, because I'm going to have to spend a week with every single person I see explaining to them what I did to my hair when I'm just trying to come to work. Right. I just want to go to work. I don't want to talk to you about my hair. We're not friends like that. Like, I just want to come to work. So if I throw a wig on today, I'm throwing a wig on today because that's what I felt like. And if I get some braids, that's what I felt like. It shouldn't be a topic of conversation, but it is, because of the cultural norms. Right. Right. All right. So Wendy, we have mentioned that you are the foundation of, that your work is the foundation of the Crown Act. And every episode, I like to kind of break down some technical things. It is called Getting Common. So I would like you to explain to us what part of your work is in the Act, and what are your definitions and things that have made it into the Crown Act?
Sure. Well, I'll have to tell you that I have worked on, or at least advanced, almost 20 pieces of civil rights legislation, either denominated the Crown Act or are parallel versions of the Crown Act. And so in terms of my work and how it shaped this legislation, just every day actively either helping to draft legislation, like, for example, the Federal Crown Act that would amend several of our federal civil rights protections against race and national origin discrimination. Additionally, as you know, as a professor, we have to write, we have to publish, we have to write those law review articles for promotion and tenure. And so back in 2008, I published one of the first pieces around grooming codes discrimination, in particular around the ways in which how appearance, like how we dress, the language that we may speak, our accents, the way in which we wear our hair has animated racial discrimination, but hasn't been viewed as that under our federal civil rights law. So in that piece, Title VII, What's Hair and Other Race-Based Characteristics Got to Do with It, which I'm happy to report has been republished this year in a special edition of the University of Colorado Law Review on Racial Justice, one of 4 pieces. So I'm excited to report that was republished, now 12, 13 years later, is that in that particular piece, what I was really interrogating were the ways in which federal courts were viewing race, and very narrowly, viewing race as a biological construct, and therefore limiting civil rights protections against racial discrimination on the basis of what they call immutable characteristics, like characteristics that you cannot change, characteristics that you're born with, or characteristics that only individuals of a particular racial group possess, which really are none, right? So this is why I call this doctrine a legal fiction. But nonetheless, what was happening, back to that, is that you saw that these cases, again, these federal courts were saying that, discrimination on the basis of afros is race discrimination, but if you lock, twist, or, braid your afro, then it's not. And so what I did was, I just saw that this was a very narrow form of what constitutes race, very much shaped by these outdated biological notions of race. And I put forth a definition of race that I thought that federal courts and other lawmakers could use, which is that we should really be thinking about race as characteristics that are historically or commonly, contemporarily, and just simply associated with race and animate racial discrimination. So that definition has is now a part of the Crown Acts and other types of legislation. It has also shaped federal courts in constitutional cases and in other federal civil rights statutory cases. And also to Marissa's point earlier, is shaped important in groundbreaking legal enforcement guidance, like in New York City, as well as in New Jersey and other spaces, and has also shaped litigation on behalf of not only claimants who are trying to fight race-based natural hair discrimination, but again, as Marissa alluded to, all forms of appearance discrimination at the intersection of race, religion, national origin, color, gender expression. And so the work really now, I don't know how many articles later, but and also advocacy later, has really fueled a whole movement to protect against appearance and grooming codes discrimination at the intersection of all of these different identity characteristics and traits. And so that's what I've been doing, and that's how the work has informed not only the Crown Act, but also I think greater levels of awareness around the fact that these norms of professionalism that are associated with our appearance really do bring about inequity, right? And really do bring about, as you mentioned before, real emotional and psychological consequences, and really are barriers to our equal participation and inclusion in society and other spaces. And so it's really being able to increase that level of public awareness so that we can change our minds and we can free ourselves and liberate ourselves from these outdated norms of professionalism and what's acceptable and what's pretty and all those other things, so that we can all be living more freely and in society.
So I've got two follow-up questions for you, Wendy.
Sure.
The first is, how do we find all of your work? Obviously, we could Google you, which is what I tell people. I'm like, have you not ever Googled Wendy Greene? Or have you never Googled the word like hair discrimination? Because when you do, Wendy Greene comes up. But in case Google doesn't work for everyone, how do we find all of these articles and all of this wonderful work that you have done?
Oh, well, thank you. So yes, you can Google me. You can do that, definitely. Or you can follow me on Instagram or on Twitter or LinkedIn, as well as Facebook at Free the Hair Now, as well as at Professor D. Wendy. And you can go to my website, which soon we'll be posting the articles on the website at freethehair.com. So yeah, so and if all else fails, you can always, I know this sounds really crazy, you can actually inbox me and I'm happy to forward you articles. I'm still a little old school, so I'm happy to email and respond to these messages. But you can definitely Google the work and it comes up on Google Scholar pretty easily in terms of not only grooming codes discrimination, but also something else that Marissa mentioned in terms of discrimination on the basis of misperceptions and misperceived identities. And so I've also been a leader in that field as well. And so you can also Google more and learn more about the ways in which, our mistaken identities sometimes often animate discrimination and should likewise violate our federal and local civil rights laws.
Awesome. So first, Google Wendy.
Yeah.
Right?
Go to freethehair.com.
Go to freethehair.com. And
Yes.
you can inbox her and she will actually send you the articles. So there is no reason to not cite Wendy Greene. I harp on this because as a professor, one of our biggest challenges, especially as Black women professors, is that people do not cite us. And so I will read things that I know I said in articles all the time. And I have not been cited. Wendy reads things all the time. And sometimes I think it doesn't matter. People are like, oh, you're a professor, it doesn't happen. It's like, no, there seems to be this perception that, if you're going to steal from someone, you can steal work from a Black woman. So don't do that to Wendy anymore. You can Google, or you can inbox her and she will literally send you the article that you need to cite. So the other question I have, because, I think all of us professors, just are amazed at what you have done, because we write definitions in our articles all the time. And how do you go from writing a definition in a law review article, which we say nobody reads, right, except for other law professors, to having that be a part of so many different parts of legislation? So like, what was the process like of going from writing the articles, defining race in the articles, and then getting to where we are now, where it's cited?
Sure. Well, I just have to say it was divine intervention in so many different ways. What I can say is that in writing my scholarship, I've always tried to make it, obviously theoretical, sound and grounded, interdisciplinary nature, but it's accessible to the average person, so that anybody who may be aware of this issue or maybe not aware of this issue could really be able to read it and it would resonate. And so I think that was a big part of the scholarship, namely on grooming discrimination and race-based natural hair discrimination more specifically. And I mean, frankly, I will have middle school students or high school students reaching out to me and saying, I came across your article and it was so helpful to me for my school project. It was helpful for me to try to really educate school administrators and teachers on how to change their grooming policies. And so it's really taking like these really complicated subjects, right, and these issues, and like what you're doing, making some common sense out of it, breaking it down, making it accessible, and really trying to advance things that are going to be practically and realistically employed in our own personal lives, in our professional spaces, and then more broadly in the law, right, by lawmakers. And so that is really the aim of my work. How it has come about in terms of it shaping legal reform is that some folks will read about it. When you want to try to tackle a particular civil rights issue, then you go to legal scholarship. First and foremost, in addition to cases and statutes. And so that's one part of it in terms of how it shaped legislation and other legal reforms, but also getting out there and I mean, I have traveled all over the world promoting this particular civil rights issue and really educating people about it in all throughout the United States and 4 continents over the past 10 plus years. So that too helps to inform, or at least to shape people's ideas that then lead to policy change, personal change and policy change, and ultimately legal change as well. I will tell you, I've also, hit the pavement in terms of knocking on legislators' doors and saying, hey, this is a real issue that our federal civil rights laws does not address effectively, and we need to change or amend our civil rights protections. So literally going to the halls of Congress, walking and being lost in those halls of Congress, and setting up meetings, talking to people about the importance of the civil rights legislation, and volunteering, right, to actually to help draft, to help serve as an expert in the drafting, as well as the enforcement of this legislation and other types of legal reforms. And then finally, I think also trying to shape the next generation of change agents, whether it's through my teaching or it's through getting out there and talking to different civic organizations, from 5-year-olds to 85-year-olds, to talking to people all over in so many different spaces. So it's really, for me, I think in sum, it's about being not just simply a scholar, but being a scholar activist. And that is how the work has really helped to shape not only the law, but also policy and also personal change in lives.
Awesome. I love that explanation, Wendy, because, one phrase that I hate is Black girl magic. It's more like it's Black girl hard work, right? It's Black girl perseverance,
Say
right?
that.
Right. And you just prove it's how do you make it happen? You put in the work, right? You work as hard as Wendy has worked on something, and you are passionate about it. And then you get the outcome by putting in the work every day, as Wendy has for decades, right? Like, she's put in the work. She didn't just wake up one morning and have it happen, right?
No,
or hand it to her.
Right.
No, not at all. I will tell you really quickly, Carlos, and you probably, and Rasheedah, you probably already know. So people thought I was crazy for even tackling this issue. Like, that people thought this is not real legal scholarship. This is not really even important. And largely because it is dealing with race, but even particular is shaped by the very specific experiences of Black people. And also a lot of people, because it's not their experience, they don't believe that is important, right? And so, thankfully, I had enough wherewithal, and as you mentioned before, passion about it, and feeling very purpose-filled to not only just write one article about it, but to keep writing about it and to keep talking about it, because I know that this is an issue, just broadly speaking, that really affects people's lives. It affects our lives not only in terms of loss of employment or educational opportunities or housing opportunities or entry into certain public accommodations, but it has real psychological and physiological impacts. And so when I talk about, race-based natural hair discrimination in particular, as it relates to Black women and girls, I always say, if you care about Black women's health, then you have to care about our hair. And so I will tell you is that, oftentimes we get like, don't talk about race in your legal scholarship, you won't be taken seriously, and all those types of things. And I really have to resist that and really just speak about that. And I'm so glad that I didn't listen to those naysayers and really just do the work, and do it earnestly. And I thank everybody, thank you and Rasheedah and Marissa and so many others for the support of it, because I couldn't do the work without this tremendous group of individuals who have supported and uplifted me along the way.
And we can't keep doing the work without people like you, right? Like now, if you don't talk about race when it's obvious, that is a bigger deal than not talking about, than eliminating race at all. And I think, it's people like Wendy, people like Mario and Angela and all these other scholars who refuse to listen to people telling them not to talk about race, that have enabled all of us to talk about race constantly. So we are all very appreciative of y'all paving the way for us to be scholars. All right, Rasheedah. So you're a small business owner now, and you can wear your hair however you want. But you also are consulting and advising clients about what they should do with their workplace, what they should do for their branding and marketing. And so I would love to hear about what laws you're following, like in your business practices, and what you're kind of encouraging your clients to do, in your communications company.
Well, the good thing is most of our clients are in the political realm, so they've at least heard of the Crown Act, and that first level, that awareness is the first, that's the first step. So that's helpful. What I'm starting to see the trend of clients wanting to incorporate more diversity in their collateral and graphics and everything that is part of that branding process. So they want to have pictures of, even if it's stock photos of women with natural hair. That's becoming more of the thing. I'm starting to see more natural hair when I go into clients' offices, which is amazing to see that they're allowed to flourish and do what they want to do. Because let's be honest, if you don't feel comfortable with the way that you're wearing your hair at work, or you feel like you've got to spend time in your workday answering questions, that starts to undermine your perceived professionalism. I mean, if people are talking to you about your hair, then they're not talking to you about what work you're doing. And that's not how you get ahead in this world. So again, the work that Wendy is doing is so transformative, and it's so incredibly important to every part of our lives. And I'm very, very grateful and so proud.
You bring up a good point. And I often think about how, when I'm styling my own hair, even if my hair is natural, I take the path of least resistance in my mind, right? So, before I locked my hair, I would blow my hair out if I was going to meet someone new, right? If I have locks, I won't have them out or in some weird, crazy style that I like to wear. I'm more likely to pull it back, put it in a bun, do something that is more conservative, because in my mind, I don't want to have the conversation about my hair or have my hair be a distraction, because I don't know how the person I'm going to meet is going to take it, even though they shouldn't be discriminating. And so I just wonder, as a business owner, are you still having to censor yourself a little bit in that, make those judgment calls, that I find myself still making? Or, is it a point in your industry where it's so accepted that you really can just not think about it anymore?
So it's funny because I obviously have these same conversations in my head, these same things like, okay, I'm going to speak at something, or I'm going to interview a potential client. Maybe I should straighten my hair. Something about the pandemic changed that for me. And I don't know if it's because I wasn't going to get my hair done. I didn't feel like doing my hair myself. And I wore my hair curly pretty much the entire quarantine. And so every Zoom, and we worked like normal, everything was just virtual. So every Zoom, every interview with potential client, they saw my hair curly. Every time we did, my business partner, Calvin, and I would do things, for our company where we would put out videos on our social media, I wear my hair curly, either out or in a curly bun. And it made me feel so good and so comfortable. So there's something about that liberated me, and I don't feel that way anymore. So people can take me however I feel like wearing my hair that day, period.
That's awesome. That is so amazing. And, I think, I kind of agree with you, right? Like during the pandemic, I might jump on Zoom with my head wrap on, and it was just, it's like, it is what it is. You're in my house.
And in my house.
Yeah. Like I'm not going to change my hair while I'm in my house. Like there was something about that, I think, that made it super offensive that we are expected to change ourselves, for sure. Rasheedah has mentioned her business several times. And I should give the disclaimer or I guess it's not a disclaimer, it's information. The way that I know Rasheedah is through one of my good friends, Calvin Dark, who is one of my classmates from Duke, which means I've known him for a number of years, more years than I'm willing to tell you the number of. And so what I would love for you to do is to tell us how we find RC Communications. If people want to reach out to you about either retaining you, if they want to see the videos and things that you have, like how do we do all of that?
So you can find our company, RC Communications, at rccomsdc.com. You can find me on social media. You can find RC Comms on social media at rccomsdc.com. We're at rccomsdc on all social media platforms. I'm Rasheedah_T on all social media platforms. And I encourage you to link in with me. I'm pretty great on LinkedIn. You can, like Wendy said, you can send me a message. I'm pretty quick about DMs on LinkedIn. That's the best way to reach me professionally.
Awesome. And if I am in a crisis, right? If I've had a scandal,
yeah.
Do y'all have like a bat phone? Do y'all have like an emergency way to get you?
Yes, you can call Carlos. Carlos will text me.
That's actually true. Like you could.
Yes. Absolutely. But yes, we're easy to find. If you Google us, we're easy to find on social media or through our website. You can contact us through our website pretty quickly and effectively. Crisis Comm is one of the most rewarding things that we do at our firm because we're usually working with someone at the worst time in their lives. So we are extremely accessible.
Awesome.
When one is going through a crisis. So no, we don't make ourselves hard to find.
And I will say, oh, go ahead, Wendy.
No. I was just gonna just give Rasheedah a shout out too, because she is amazing during times of crisis and non-crisis. I have benefited personally and professionally from her expertise and her advice. And really, I will have to say in terms of branding, as well as just like, re-envisioning yourself as, a public figure, which I think is very challenging sometimes for academics, and in particular legal academics, because that's not it's not really our space, right? And so Rasheedah, I mean, I can't tell you how grateful I am for helping to change my mind, to help me to liberate my mind, free myself, and how I even see myself and how I'm showing up in the world. So I appreciate you. So I definitely endorse.
Thank you. I'm a huge advocate for women in positions of power. And so I try professionally and personally to help women, especially Black women. We are so incredibly powerful. And I think we first need to see ourselves that way. And so I find myself working with a lot of Black women leaders in business and politics and academics, first making them realize you are incredibly powerful and you are an expert in your field. I mean, Wendy is the definition of expert in her field. Like the definition. So working with her has always been a dream. So I'm so happy to support her.
And what I was going to say is the reason that Calvin and Rasheedah do such good work is you don't know who their clients are.
That's right.
Right? You do not know who they have helped through. Like I have no idea who their clients are. And even when they tell me who their clients are, they tell me in such a vague way that I'm like, what, who? I don't even know what you're talking about. That's how good their work is, right? If you know who someone's crisis communicator is, then they probably aren't doing a great job, right? But I never know who Calvin and Rasheedah are working for. So if you find yourself in a crisis, call Rasheedah. She will get you out of it. She will get you out of it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, so Wendy, I have one more. I'm trying to see, we're a little behind, but not that much. So I do have one more kind of technical question for you.
Sure.
And it's kind of this technical legal question. I think, for law professors, I'm going to ask her to explain federalism, but essentially, why is it that we need a federal statute, court cases, state legislation, because you've got these Crown Acts in all the different states, we've got it in Congress, and then the municipal litigation that Marissa had? Why can't like one thing just fix all of it?
Everything. That is such an important question. And I'm just going to nerd out just for a second on this question.
You should.
Okay. So why is it important? Well, many of us feel like if we have a federal civil rights statute, then it's going to cover everything. And it doesn't. It covers a lot of things, definitely. A lot of spaces, a lot of individuals, prohibiting them from engaging in discrimination or protecting individuals from discrimination or other forms of inequality. But why we need on the state level, oftentimes what you will see, number one, is that they may cover more people. So, for example, with Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act that prohibits race discrimination in workplaces, it governs those private workplaces with 15 or more individuals or 15 or more employees. Well, oftentimes on the state and municipal level, you have a lower coverage threshold, meaning it could be 4 or more employees. And so there's greater levels of individuals who are going to be protected against unlawful forms of discrimination, oftentimes on state and local levels than what we see on the federal level. Similarly, why it's important to have the federal level civil rights legislation is that, guess what? There are states that don't even have civil rights legislation that prohibit discrimination in workplaces. Okay, so it provides protection against workplace discrimination as well as other forms of discrimination that may not be available in your city or in your state. So, for example, Alabama does not have a parallel statute that prohibits this race discrimination or sex discrimination, national origin discrimination, or religious discrimination in workplaces and schools and housing and other spaces. So literally in trying to pass this legislation there, you are starting from scratch, okay? You also have, for example, in some spaces, well, thankfully on the federal level, we have non-discrimination statutes that deal with workplaces and schools and housing as well as public accommodations. But on the local level, you may not have that breadth of coverage, right? It may just be schools or it may just be workplaces. So this is why it's important to really not only try to implement, say, the Crown Act on local and municipal as well as federal levels, but just civil rights legislation more generally, why it's important to have civil rights legislation and protections on all of these different levels. And then lastly, as it relates to the litigation part of it, why is litigation important? Well, the litigation is the tool to actually try to interpret the scope of protections that we have under our federal civil rights laws. And so it really does bring about, I feel like, even to some degree, oftentimes more meaningful protection for everyday individuals is through this litigation. And so that's really important. So they go hand in hand. Ideally, we don't want to have litigation, right? Because the idea is that maybe people are either doing the right thing in these spaces in terms of not discriminating, but it's a very important tool in terms of illuminating if there is something wrong or some kind of discrimination or inequity happening in these particular spaces. It actually lets folks know. It's a very important public tool in terms of disseminating information about what's happening in these spaces. And that litigation, just like that legislation, helps to either bring about real substantive protections for not only those individuals who are involved in the litigation, but everybody else who might be affected by the discrimination. But as you can see, sometimes even through litigation, it may do the opposite, right? And so hence, this is why the legislation is important, because it helps to cure sometimes those gaps in legal protection that courts can often create. And then lastly, what I'll say about enforcement guidance, really quickly, is that oftentimes many of us are not aware that we have human and civil rights agencies that are charged with enforcing our civil rights laws, whether it be state or local or federal. And so that enforcement guidance, the ways in which those investigators, the ways in which, administrative law judges are investigating and deciding these cases, adjudicating these cases, is really important, because they're the ones responsible and charged with ensuring that our civil rights protections are actually doing what they're supposed to do. And so that enforcement guidance is really critically important as well. So it may not be legislation, and sometimes it may result in litigation, but that enforcement guidance is really quite critical because it tells us, or at least ensures that those people who are on the ground, who are working on our behalves in these spaces, in our cities and in our states, that they are really enforcing our civil rights laws in the ways that they should be and bringing about meaningful protection against discrimination and inequity in workplaces and other spaces. So all of these different parts of our government are really important. And I think lastly, in terms of the local and state legislation and enforcement guidance, what I've really seen is that so many people from all different walks of life have been critically involved in getting the legislation passed. It's not just the lawyers, it's not just those who are deemed social justice advocates or civil rights advocates. It's students in the schools, it's parents who have experienced discrimination, or their children have experienced discrimination, from all different ages and walks of life. And it really does help to bring about greater levels of political participation from us all when we are advancing or helping to support some of these local and state measures, unlike sometimes on the federal level where we may not have direct access to those spaces in the same way. So this is why, this movement, I feel like on so many different levels is so important, because it shows us the importance of our government on all different levels, but also the ways in which we too can get involved in our government and social and legal change on all different levels.
So just a quick follow-up question.
Sure.
Let's say I am a parent in middle of nowhere, Alabama, and my child has been discriminated against for having locks. Who do I call?
Well, I will say in Alabama, you would call the equal employment opportunity. Well, actually, if it's a school, sorry, take that back. So I'm thinking about workplaces. My head is in the workspace. But if it's a workplace discrimination issue, definitely the EEOC or the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission there. In terms of the educational space, oh boy, since there's no express protections against race-based natural hair discrimination in Alabama, what you want to do is contact your school administrators. You also want to contact those who are over the particular school district. You may even want to contact your local officials, say the city council, for example, in that particular jurisdiction, so they are aware of this kind of discrimination that might be happening in the schools. And so I think that's also really important. Obviously, you can call the lawyer too, but what I will say is that you can also effectuate change on these other levels in terms of informing those who are actually implementing these types of regulations or creating these types of regulations. So teachers, school officials, city council members, or other local officials, I think would definitely be the way to go.
And are there any national organizations you would recommend? If you kind of hit those points and it fails, are there a couple of nonprofits or other national organizations that are at the forefront of helping parents in places that don't have laws in place, or people in a state that does not have a law in place?
Sure, absolutely. So I've had the privilege of working with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, who has been at the forefront of these issues as well, and have found really, they are just amazing. They just really are the advocates there. And so they have been able to really navigate those spaces where there may not be express protection, or they might find protection within municipal and state or local regulations. So definitely the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, as well as the ACLU, or the American Civil Liberties Union. They too have been at the forefront of combating not only race-based natural hair discrimination, but grooming codes and appearance discrimination more generally. So both of those national organizations have been extremely influential and have been great partners in this work.
Awesome. So I like to close the show with predictions. So Rasheedah, where do you think we go next with grooming codes and hair care discrimination? Where do you think we're going?
I think that It's been really great in the media to see high profile women and men wear their hair naturally. I think it's really helping normalize and I always say you can't be what you can't see. And so I think it's important for these little young Black girls and boys to see people in positions of power who are wearing their hair naturally, knowing that you can be successful and wear your hair any way that you want. When I see Joy Reid and Michelle Obama and Tiffany Cross wearing their hair curly, I celebrate it. I think it's amazing. Even my local meteorologist, I love that we're starting to see it more and more in advertisement and marketing. And I think that is the trend that will continue.
All right. And Wendy, just tell us briefly, like, what do you have coming up? What is next? Like plug the Wendy Greene show.
Well, lots happening. Hopefully finishing up this book, #FreeTheHair, Locking Black Hair into Civil Movements in the near future, fingers crossed. And also, right now I will just tell you, I'm again taking this on the international road. So hopefully seeing some more legal reforms in other countries in the near future. And just continuing to get out there and advocating for that everybody is able to rock their hair freely and freely rock their hair however they so choose. So those are the things that are on the forefront for me.
Awesome. All right, so we only have a minute or so left. So I want to thank my guests today. I want to remind you that you can find this show on the Voice America Network. It's also on iTunes, Spotify, my YouTube channel. There's so many ways to listen to our show. You can join us this time next week when I will be discussing social impact investing and the difficult relationship between taking money from organizations, shopping at organizations based on the way that they advertise and what they really do in their C-suite and other places. And my guest next week will be Carrie Martin Shelby, who's a professor at Washington and Lee, and the author of a lot of groundbreaking work, and my friend Ron Goins, who is the fundraising director of the Movement for Black Lives. You can email me on the show page. You can reach me on social media at Carla C on all platforms. Thank you for listening. And we have to leave y'all, but Wendy and I are going to drink champagne like that. Here. So that is happening when we go off air. Like we're having a champagne celebration to celebrate Wendy, to celebrate life, to celebrate all things. So thank you all for joining us today. And please tune in next week and follow us everywhere. You can listen as many times as you want by going to iTunes and Spotify. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers.